Elaris was never a colony. It was a promise. And Terra never breaks its promises.
The Vow of Terra, Chapter 1. The lavender waves of Elaris shimmered beneath the twin suns, casting violet and silver hues across a coastline sculpted by time and tectonic grace. Massive coral plateaus jutted from the sea like ancient temples, each ringed with teeming reefs that pulsed with bioluminescent life. Above them, terraces carved into the cliffs housed open-air villas draped in flowering vines, half-grown, half-printed, designed with a blend of Terran minimalism and Elarian fluidist architecture. Gleaming spires twisted toward the sky in the capital city of Lyra's crest, their forms echoing the petals of the native Aravelli blossom. Solar glass shimmered like water across their surfaces, reflecting skybirds in flight and drawing gentle spirals of warm air around the streets below. Markets buzzed under violet canopy awnings, where Elarian spice sellers called out to Terran retirees with practiced charm. "Half credits for a first harvest cinnamon leaf. Come, taste the soul of the jungle." Nearby, a child ran barefoot along a paved path made of old hull plates and jungle stone, laughing as a six-legged pet chaser beetle scurried after him. Down by the ocean, the high-end district of Cape Doral glistened with glass platforms suspended above the waves, home to zero-G yoga studios, neural spa retreats, and ocean view cafes that served both Terran tea and thick Elarian root wine. The scent of salted sugar fruit drifted on the breeze. It was a weekday morning. The sky was soft, the weather mild. The tide was perfect for swimming. Elaris was paradise. But it wasn't just the scenery. It was the quiet, unspoken sense of belonging, of recovery. 60 years ago, the planet had nearly collapsed under the weight of a relentless pandemic, a fast-mutating virus that spread across species lines and nearly claimed half the planet's population before Terra intervened. The Terran cure came not in warships, but in care packages. Vaccines, nanite healers, agricultural reseeding drones. The cure saved the planet, but what followed? Partnerships, trade, mutual rebuilding, healed it. It wasn't a colony. It wasn't a protectorate. It was the vow made real. Now over 200,000 Terrans called Elaris home. Most were retired from active service, engineers, explorers, scientists. They lived cheaply thanks to tech-sharing agreements and Terran-subsidized housing, their credits going far in a place where energy was free and food was half-grown in orbital green clouds. Many chose to be buried here. Some had married into Elarian families. Others had simply come to die among peace. It was a place where pain had been forgiven, a planet that had learned how to breathe again. Until now. High above the glittering beaches and terraced villas of Cape Doral, a speck appeared in the sky. First one, then many. At first they were mistaken for high-altitude transport drones, the kind that carried mineral loads from the northern Delrinium mines to the processing towers. But then came the sonic booms. Rapid, unrelenting. Screams followed seconds later, echoing through the resort districts and cliffside towns. Commander Viren Tor, Supreme Guard of the Elarian Defense Council, stood on the observation deck of the capital citadel, eyes fixed on the growing cluster of incoming vessels. He was no stranger to the chaos of war. In his youth, he had trained under Terran military advisors during the post-pandemic rebuilding years. He had read every Terran strategic archive made available to the Allied planets, but nothing had prepared him for this. The ships descending from orbit bore no flag, no signal, no ID beacons, just silence, and the slow, deliberate posture of death. Multiple contacts breaching orbital zone confirmed vector approach from the Graxian Rift, his aide stammered, fingers flying across the holo console. 8 heavy destroyers, interceptors deploying. They're targeting military infrastructure. Scramble all skyward wings, Viren ordered, voice calm despite the cold rising in his gut. Deploy shield drones across coastal sectors. Prepare our ground batteries. Elevate to lethal force. We're under treaty restrictions, sir, the aide reminded him. FTL interdiction, orbital shields, none of it approved for use unless sanctioned by... I said deploy. Viren's voice dropped a note. Terra's protections don't matter if we're dead by sundown. Across the planet, automated warnings rang through city streets and open-air markets. All civilians evacuate to designated bunkers immediately. This is not a drill. On the western side of the capital, a series of low-rising terraces housed the Terran retirement enclave known as Halcyon Reach. It was a quiet, idyllic place, carefully balanced between Elarian architecture and Terran comfort. Most of its residents were former engineers, explorers, and diplomats, drawn to Elaris for its unmatched quality of life, low expenses, and beautiful climate. They had come here to escape the noise of the galaxy, but now it had followed them home. A retired astrocartographer named Mira Alcott stood on her balcony, watching the sky split open in red light. The air shimmered as kinetic torpedoes detonated near the capital perimeter. A shockwave struck seconds later, shattering the glass of nearby towers. Screams rose around her. She didn't run. She reached for her old comlink. At that very moment, half a system away, on the Terran vessel Resolute Dawn, Admiral Rael Dren was wrapping up a diplomatic call with the Durnari Trade Council. His officers were relaxed, jumpsuits unzipped to the collar, music playing in the mess. The conversation was about fuel tariffs. It ended abruptly when the emergency alert lit up the central holodisplay. Code Violet, Elaris under mast, non-Terra forces, possible genocide imminent. Rael stood without a word. The music died. Within seconds, all crew on deck snapped to attention. "Are they certain?" he asked, voice low. "Confirmed," replied the bridge officer. "No prior warnings, no communication. This was surgical. They went for comm relays, satellites, supply routes. Civilian centers are next. Get me the Archon." On Terra Prime, deep beneath the arcology spires of New Geneva, Grand Archon Liera Masev sat before a layered tactical map of the galaxy. She wore the crisp indigo uniform of the Terran Diplomatic Defense Corps. High-collared, understated, the kind of uniform designed to suggest strength without menace. Around her, the heads of various sectors filed in: trade, security, interstellar justice, and shadow operations. A single red flare blinked above the map. "First strike," she said, barely above a whisper. The council chamber fell silent. "They didn't even ask for negotiations," said Director Halen. "This wasn't about leverage or politics. This was about erasing Elaris." "Have we confirmed who?" asked Masav. "Nothing official," replied the intelligence lead, "but orbital trajectories and drive signatures point to the Xalor Combine." A hush fell again. The Xalor Combine hadn't been seen in battle since the Kralon War nearly a century ago. Back then, they'd lost to a fractured Terran force with fewer weapons and no allies. What had changed? "Why Elaris?" Masev asked aloud. "Resources," said Trade Minister Kayan. "Delrinium and gold. Our fastest FTL ships use both. They're not attacking Elaris. They're attacking us." A slow, bitter breath escaped her lip. "And what do we do?" someone asked quietly. The Grand Archon leaned forward, tapped a biometric plate, and watched the surface of the map slide away, revealing a hidden layer, something most in the room had never seen before: a network of nodes, satellites, black sites, and mobile platforms stretching from Terra to the edge of the outer marches. "The galaxy thinks we are merchants," she said. "It's time they remembered what Terra became after the Krellan War." Back on Elaris, the first line of defense collapsed. Skyward wings, swift, agile fighter units, were no match for the precision and range of the Xalor fleet. Shields buckled, explosions lit the horizon. But even as comm relays went dark and surface batteries ran dry, the Elarian soldiers stood their ground. For every tower that fell, a bunker held. For every drone taken out of the sky, a child was moved to safety. And far below, in a hidden control center beneath the Elarian Capital Archive, a last-ditch signal was being sent. Not a cry for help, a trigger code. R7VOWPROWPO. The comm lines of the Terran Central Defense Grid hadn't buzzed this loudly in nearly a century. In an underground vault beneath Luna's Tycho command, a system buried in myth stirred to life. Dormant relay satellites powered up across 8 systems. Their quantum keys matched only one command, R7, Vow Priority 1, the Vow Protocol. It was never meant to be used. Designed in the final days of the Krellon War, it was more myth than policy. A shadow contingency built on the belief that peace, once earned, would not last. Few even knew it existed. Fewer still believed it would ever be activated. But now the code rippled through Terra's hidden neural net array, bypassing bureaucracies, flagging only the highest access nodes. In New Geneva, Grand Archon Lyra Misev stood alone on the central command dais, her eyes lit by a silent storm of cascading data. Ship manifests, weapon loadouts, dead-hand encryption. She barely noticed when her assistant, Lane, entered the chamber. "It's real," Lane said quietly. Misev nodded once. "How long until deployment?" 6 minutes. The Voralis fleet is closest. They're already shifting formation near the Damaris Rift. Good. Keep them dark, no transmissions. If this is bait, I want no signal trace. What about the civilian channels? Retirees are already transmitting panics to OpenNet. The colonies are picking it up. Let them panic, Misev replied. Better panic than betrayal. Back on Elaris, in the shadow of the broken skyline, Commander Viren Tor took cover behind the scorched frame of a Skytrain transport. Smoke rolled through the boulevard. He could hear the whine of Xalor hoverstrikes rounding the corner, their plasma coils fully charged. His rifle was almost depleted. 2 drones hovered behind him, barely more than recon units. It wouldn't be enough, and yet he stood. Beside him, Captain Salai knelt over an injured Terran, retired, unarmed, and partially buried in debris. "Hold still," she whispered, patching his bleeding leg with a dermal wrap. "You shouldn't be here," he croaked, face pale. Salai met his eyes. "We live here, too." That was the truth that no one had wanted to say aloud. Elaris wasn't just a client world, a trade hub, or a mining partner. It had become home to the retired, to the weary, to those who sought peace, and now it was a graveyard waiting for names. In low orbit, cloaked just beyond Ilarion sensor range, a Terran stealth frigate designated Wraith Echo watched in silence. The captain, Juna Kael, kept her hands steady as targeting data flooded in. She'd been trained in Ghost Ops, observe, do not engage. But even she was breathing faster. "They're not just targeting military posts," said her tactical officer. "Look here, resort sectors, water desalination plants, medical towers. That's systematic eradication. This isn't conquest, it's cleansing." Juna's jaw tightened. She tapped her neural uplink. "Wraith Echo to Terra Prime. I am requesting full override on engagement protocols." A long pause. Then came the reply, chilling and direct. "Request approved. Vow protocol authorized. Full spectral release permitted. Targeting solutions uploading now." For a moment, silence hung on the bridge. Then Juna turned to her weapons officer. "Lock plasma cores. Load mirror darts and crucible beams. I want every enemy ship over Elaris rendered to atoms." "And if they run?" Juna's eyes flashed. "Follow." In a glass-walled chamber beneath the capital, buried deeper than even the Ilarian High Council knew, the original Vow terminal continued broadcasting its dead man signal. It pulsed, not with hope, but with memory. When the pandemic had come 60 years ago, Elaris had begged the stars for help. It was Terra who answered. They sent ships, healers, bioengineers, vaccines, food. They rebuilt cities. They laid roads that didn't scar the jungle, taught medicine without erasing culture. Not because they were paid to, but because they remembered what it meant to suffer. It was there, in those years, that the vow was made, a silent pact. If Elaris ever bled again, Terra would bleed with it. The first Terran response ships entered the system just as Ilarian orbital defenses collapsed entirely. Twin Xalor dreadnoughts began to descend through the atmosphere, planning to flatten the capital. And then the sky fractured. Terran vessels shimmered into view like spectral wraiths. No flash, no fanfare. They struck in total silence. One dreadnought blinked out of existence before it could finish its descent, its quantum core inverted by a crucible beam. Second spiraled in flame, cut apart mid-sentence by mirror darts that rebounded endlessly within its hull, slicing it to ribbons. Below, Commander Maraine looked up in disbelief as the burning fragments rained harmlessly into the sea. "Sir," Salai whispered, "that's Terran firepower. That's Black Tier tech. We weren't told they had." No one was. Across the battlefield, the Xalor formations began to scatter, but the Terran ships were already in motion, leaping through coordinated grav-trump relays, teleporting within kilometers of fleeing enemy units. It was not a battle, it was a purge. In the outer orbit, a Xalor command ship, the Vecturus, tried to initiate an emergency slipstream jump. Too late. From the Terran strike cruiser Resolute Dawn, Admiral Kael Dren gave the order. "Fire, Vortex Lance! Detonate on core proximity." The screen flared white. Seconds later, the Vecturus was gone. Not destroyed. Erased. The vow had been kept. The smoke had not yet cleared when the first rescue dropships landed on the scorched boulevards of the Elarian capital. Their black hulls bore no flags, no call signs, only the shimmering insignia of the Terran crescent, once a symbol of trade and diplomacy, now etched in the memory of every survivor as a mark of vengeance. Commander Maraine stood in the shadow of a collapsed monorail tower, a makeshift bandage tied around his ribs. Beside him, dozens of civilians, Elarian and Terran alike, blinked up at the descending transports with disbelief. Most had assumed they would die here. A few had welcomed it. Instead, the sky had split open and fire had answered. From the lead dropship, a single Terran officer stepped down. She was tall, wrapped in an armored exosuit that flexed like woven muscle. Her helmet retracted as she approached Maraine, revealing dark eyes and a severe braid streaked with silver. "Commander Tor," she said. "Admiral Kael, I'm here to assist." He stared at her for a long moment. "You didn't announce your arrival. We weren't here to negotiate. Are you the only fleet?" Admiral Kael shook her head. "That was the first wave. Others are already moving into position." Viren gestured toward the burning skyline, the remains of the Xalor incursion. "We have wounded. No power grid, no orbital net, and our planetary defense systems are gone. Then it's a good thing you're not alone anymore." Half a world away, in the mountain resort town of Valoria, the fires still raged. The Xalor had torched everything on their way out. Luxury towers, shuttle pads, spa domes. What remained were embers, shattered glass, and the hollow silence of the dead. But some had lived. Mira Alcott, retired Terran astrocartographer, age 91, sat on a cracked bench overlooking the lavender sea. Her hands were burned, her breathing shallow, but her eyes were locked on the sky. She had seen them. The Terran vassals that had emerged from nothing. The way they moved, silent, unstoppable, ruthless in precision. They didn't fight like warriors. They fought like predators, efficient, instinctive, absolute. A soft whir hummed at her side. One of the Terran rescue bots hovered down, extending a compartmentalized med kit. "Ma'am," the synthetic voice said gently, "we're here now. You're safe." She didn't reply at first. Then, quietly, "They forgot the warning." The bot paused. "Which warning, ma'am?" She looked skyward again. "Don't force our hand." On the far side of the Elarian system, within a dense asteroid belt obscured from standard sensors, the surviving Xalor command units gathered in silence. 3 warships, once part of a dozen, remained functional. One was venting plasma, another had no life support. General Zorvek stood at the edge of the bridge, one of his mandibles broken and sparking. His command crew lay in various states of injury or panic behind him. None dared speak. The Terrans weren't supposed to fight back like that. They were merchants, engineers, diplomats, soft-handed, soft-spoken, slow to act. But this had not been defense. It had been retribution. The humans possess extinction-tier tech, muttered his aide. He should not, cannot, have erased a dreadnought in one strike. They didn't erase it, Zorfek rasped. They punished it. There's no debris. Do we retreat to the Combine? Someone asked. No, Zorfek growled. We cannot return like this. We need time, data. We must understand what the Terrans have become. And if they come for us, he turned toward the starfield, then the Combine must choose. Evolve or burn. Back on Terra Prime, the chamber of the Crescent gathered not in panic, but with cold precision. The capital city of New Geneva, once a beacon of diplomacy, was now a fortress of control. The holograms of Elaris flickered overhead, destruction, civilian trauma, the brutal math of lives lost and infrastructure shattered. But there was no outcry, no debate, only the confirmation that a vow had been honored. They struck one of ours, said Grand Archon Lyra Massev, her voice even. They thought our absence from the council meant we had grown soft, that our retreat was surrender. She glanced around the silent room. We warned them. No one challenged her. There were no treaties to cite. Terra had left the council a century ago, not in rage, but in warning. Elian Thorne had made it clear, do not test us again. And now? Asked a strategist from the North Colonies. We do nothing, Massev said. We rebuild Elaris. We watch. We let them decide what happens next. You don't want retribution? Massev narrowed her eyes. They already got retribution. What comes next is example. Outside the chamber, in a deep-gathered military node codenamed Vault Thorn, an AI construct reviewed the engagement metrics. No errors, no missed targets, all protocols executed flawlessly. It paused on the final casualty projection, 97.3% of enemy force eliminated in under 7 minutes. The AI flagged one message for human review, strategic assessment, recommendation to maintain cloak on 91% of Terran arsenal to preserve deterrent mystique. Galactic entities remain unaware of true scope. It appended a single advisory note in the Archon's private channel. The vow was upheld, but the shadow cast is only as long as the sun behind it. Begin contingency planning for when they stop fearing the dark. The lavender tide rolled quietly against the shore at Cape Doral. What had once been a bustling ocean front full of tourists, benders, and Hullakite flyers was now littered with scorch marks, broken glass, and the half-buried remnants of lives interrupted. The air still carried the scent of ion discharge and burning metal, but for the first time in days there was no sound of gunfire, only the distant thrum of Terran relief drones ferrying survivors to makeshift shelters. Commander Viren Tor stood beside the remains of a crumpled rail node, helmet tucked under one arm. A week ago, the world had been predictable, manageable. Now it had changed, utterly and forever. Behind him, children played near the shallow water. Some were Elarian, others Terran. The lines between them had always been blurring here. Elaris wasn't a colony. It wasn't a protectorate. It was a shared dream, a place where the past could stay buried and peace might actually endure, until the sky fell. A soft crunch of boots on broken stone drew Viren's attention. Admiral Kael approached, her exosuit stripped down to the hardened undershell, dust coating the reinforced fabric. Status? She asked, voice calm. Rebuilding has begun in 3 sectors. Food delivery is stabilized, civilian injuries have dropped by half, and... He hesitated. And what? We've found over 200 buried Terran supply caches scattered across the planet. Kael raised a brow. We never buried anything. I know. They looked at each other in silence. In orbit, a small Terran survey ship named Albatross approached a restricted coordinate zone locked deep within the Elarian crust. Officially, it didn't exist, flagged centuries ago, under a silent directive known only to the Archon and a handful of military architects. Now it pulsed again. Below the crust, behind miles of reinforced alloy and fusion stone, an ancient facility stirred to life. Installation, tempest rise. Interior lights flickered on, revealing corridors lined with dormant drones, prototype mechs, and experimental shielding systems built from materials no longer in production. This wasn't a war facility. It was something far stranger, a relay point, a monitoring station and, at its core, a gateway. As the systems warmed, a singular transmission pulsed into the Terran grid. Asset integrity confirmed. Mission status, reactivation pending. Initiating Stage 2, Vow Protocol. On Terra Prime, Grand Archon Massev received the alert in her private suite beneath the Crescent Arcology. She poured herself a single glass of Borean whiskey and stared at the message for a long time. She didn't smile, she didn't flinch. She simply whispered, "So it still exists." Across the stars. In a bar carved into the cliffside of a mining station in neutral space, a Xalor trader sat alone. His cloak was frayed, his mandibles moved slowly, jaw tense. He watched the holofeed projected above the bar with an expression close to reverence and maybe fear. The headline scrolled in 6 languages. Terra responds. XA, fleet nearly wiped out in 9 minutes. The footage was grainy but real. You could see the mirror darts arcing through the enemy dreadnought, slicing it like wet paper. No delay, no hesitation, no survivor. The bartender, an old Durnari with a melted ear, leaned in. "You ever seen them fight before?" he asked. The Xalor's mandibles twitched. "I thought I had." "What do you think now?" He turned away from the feed. "I think the myths were true." Back on Elaris, Admiral Kael stood before a gathering of Terran and Elarian officials beneath a temporary relief dome. She was not used to speeches. She preferred tactics to sentiment. But today required something more. "We are not conquerors," she said plainly. "We are not caretakers either. Elaris is not ours to own or to rebuild, it is yours." Murmurs passed through the crowd. "We came because of a promise made not on paper, but in blood and memory. We kept that promise, and now the choice is yours." She stepped down from the podium, leaving behind no pledge of Terran dominance, no permanent garrison, no conditions, but the message was clear. If you are Terran's ally, you are not alone. Later that night, under a sky still dusted with orbital soot, Commander Virene stood at the cliffs above Halcyon Reach. He watched the ocean glowing faintly, phosphorescent algae responding to the disruption in the tides. His city was wounded, his people were grieving, but they were not broken. Footsteps again, this time quieter. Mira Alcott joined him, wrapped in a simple shawl. Her hands were still bandaged. Her eyes held the quiet of someone who had lived through too much and still refused to look away. "Do you believe it's over?" she asked. "No," he replied. "I think this was the start of something else." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the sea. "They'll come again," she said. "Not the Xalor, maybe, but others. They always do." He didn't answer. Then she smiled faintly. "But this time, they'll think twice." At the edge of the known systems, on a moon orbiting an uninhabited gas giant, a relay beacon flickered to life. It wasn't Terran, it wasn't Elarian, it was something older, and it had been listening. The moment Terra's weapons came online, the beacon pulsed once, then began transmitting in a language no longer spoken. Not to warn, not to defend, to summon. Deep below the ice of the moon, something shifted. Ancient, mechanical, patient. The galaxy had awakened a slumbering power in Terra, but something else had awakened too.